Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Wednesday, October the 1st. We're in October. In the Memorial Arena in Victoria, British Columbia, I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it happen. First part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show, and I'm going to start off. I wrote something down about, here's my message for today's show. If we want democracy, we are going to have to fight for it, because the insane corporate lunatics who have stolen our democracy from us have absolutely no intention of giving it back. But we have to get rid of them, and fast, because they will stop at nothing to keep their power over us. And it just came to me, I'm thinking now that's why they've started ISIS. Because when citizens start to want democracy, these lunatics start wars. That's how they operate. They started World War I, they started World War II, and now they've even written it down. They want a war of civilizations. And we're the ones who are going to be doing the fighting and dying so that they can maintain their power over us. It's very frightening times. Anyways, I want to talk a bit about democracy, but that's enough for now.
Well, for sure, Jack. I mean, we've touched on this before, where if you look at what happens when you have a war, is of course the country that bears the brunt of the attack, the physical attack, is going to suffer terribly. It's not really a war. It's just a brutalization. It's as I think Noam Chomsky said, state-sanctioned atrocities. It's not really a war. You know, when you go and just drop a whole bunch of bombs on some country or shell the heck out of them or whatever, it does certainly destabilize that country and that region. I mean, look what's happening in the Middle East. Sometimes you don't really notice what happens in your own country, though, because while that's happening, it also destabilizes your own society. Because now you're not really able to speak out. Let's say in the United States, less so in Canada, but still the mechanisms there where if you're not for the war, you're sort of like unpatriotic, or you're a coward, or you know somehow or other you're not a worthy citizen. And that's a very, very dangerous place to be. And in that case, it's very hard to vote against a party or a president that's pro-war, because you're going to be seen as undemocratic or unpatriotic.
And I mean, I think we can see what's coming. If they start this war of civilizations that the neocons were writing about 15 years ago, I guess, I mean, number one is going to go any semblance of what might be left of any democracy in this country. That will disappear immediately. I think that's what it's about. I think the people who run this country and who run this world are willing. I mean, they've done that kind of thing. This thing I said about where they started World War I mean, that didn't come to me in a flash of brilliance. I read that in a column by Gwynne Dyer years ago, and I wish I would have saved it. And you know, that's when he was still allowed to write anywhere in the Canadian media. He's not really allowed anymore. He just wrote a book, though. But he said things were so bad in 1910, 1911, 1912, that around the world there was this movement for change, to get rid of the same lunatics who are running us now were running the world back then. And there was an international movement to get rid of them. And what Gwynne Dyer said was they just started World War I. And instead of these people moving against them, they got them to massacre each other, run into machine gun fire. And they still tell us that was where Canada was born. Our corporate-owned media, who works for them, tells us this every year. That's where Canada was born, when these people were being deliberately massacred for the benefit of the ruling class. And here we are again today. And if we don't stop them, they'll do the same thing to us.
And on it goes. You know, something that occurred to me just on my way in was, there's some commentary about ISIS and a lot of recruitment in the West, people leaving from Canada, United States, and England, and other countries and going to the Middle East to fight for ISIS, and how how awful that all is, and how wrong-headed it is. And then also they're talking about the threat of internal terrorism, that we could now have an attack on our own soil, much like what happened in September 11th, 2001. So it really started me thinking, okay, what is the next 9/11 event? Are they setting us up now for some type of terrible catastrophe that's going to whip us up into another real frenzy that will allow some other major war to happen? It really, really concerns me that that's maybe happening.
Yeah, and I mean, that seems to be where we are. I mean, I don't know how crazy things are, but I mean, they started, whoever they are, they started the Vietnam War based on a lie.
Yeah.
Which was the North Vietnamese, the great enemy of that day, attacked an American destroyer in international waters. And for that, like probably 1 million people, innocent people in Vietnam died because of that attack. And later they admitted that it never happened, but people have never heard that admission because the media just doesn't tell us. So they're absolute outright lies for which millions of people die. We never even hear the truth, and that's the way it works.
It really is strange, and of course ISIS is such a strange event. I call them a public relations army. Yeah, I think they were totally developed in cahoots with some PR firms. I think they sat around and hatched the whole plan, and to draw everybody into another war.
Now, I just want to throw in that a lot of people around the world are saying exactly the same thing. This isn't Walter and me making this up. You're not hearing it anywhere in the Canadian media. The Canadian corporate media will not report this, but prominent journalists, respected authors, experts around the world are saying exactly what Walter just said.
Yeah, and maybe I should do a little more research, but usually it's common sense that tells you. Remember the weapons of mass destruction in the first the Iraq War in 2003 with the George Bush Jr. War and all that went on there, and it was a complete and absolute fabrication. They absolutely could not find any weapons of mass destruction.
And it didn't matter.
It seemingly didn't matter. And they got their war. They got to dump all those munitions and slaughter a whole bunch of people and continue on with the destabilization program. And it's really troubling because it isn't that long ago. It's 10 or 12 years ago. And seemingly the public doesn't have any memory that they could just pull off the same trick. George Bush Sr. went to war in Iraq in '91. That was the incubator baby hoax.
And maybe you should just mention what that was.
Yeah.
Because people didn't want to fight that war.
Well, there was a report that the Iraq soldiers went into Kuwait, marched into their hospitals, pulled all these premature babies out of incubators and threw them on the floor and took off with the incubators. Now the thing is that there was testimony before the Senate in the United States. They had hearings about this, and this Kuwaiti woman testified that she's seen all this. In fact, she was coached by a public relations firm, Hill and Knowlton, to just go ahead and spout these lines. And she was in fact the daughter of the American ambassador to Kuwait. She wasn't even in the country. And they hatched the plan to tell this story, to outrage everyone, and that therefore...
And the media's job was to report it without ever asking a question, and that's exactly what they did. They reported that story with no questions asked, and when the truth came out, the truth was never told.
Yeah.
And that's how they operate. That's how they operated then, and that's how they operate today.
Well, it's what we call instead of weapons of mass destruction, it's weapons of mass distraction. There's always something that keeps the public away from really finding the truth. And in this case, it's a very, very, very sad situation to see what's happening in Syria right now. And, it's just a lot of needless deaths. and it need not happen. They're going to have some kind of debate, apparently, in the federal parliament about this. So we'll have to wait to see how, if anybody comes up with any other analysis of the war other than the official line.
I don't think any national politician has the courage, because clearly this war is coming from the top, the very top,
Yeah.
and the people who control all of Canada's media, and much more. I mean, these are the people who control the world. And I think any Canadian politician at any fairly high level knows that if he dares or she dares to say a word against this, they'll be destroyed by the media. So I don't think we're going to hear anything.
Well, if there's anything said, they won't be running it on an hourly cycle on the CBC News.
Yeah.
You might get one mention someplace, and on they go with the official line again.
So democracy. I've actually been working on a book about democracy for about 15 years now. So I have learned a thing or two. And so what would I like to see when I say the word democracy? What does it mean to me? For me, it means that you have an educated citizenry who's well informed about the important issues of the day, and you have an honest media that works to inform people about the important issues of the day, and the government's job is to find out what we want and then do it. I mean, to me, that's what a democracy would be like. We're so far away from that I can't even barely picture it. But I think that's what a lot of us would like, that we know what's going on, that we make the decisions, and then our governments do it. But instead, it's the exact opposite. The corporations and the people who own them and run them make all the decisions, and the politicians work for them to control us in order to get them everything they want. And they basically betray us, 365 days a year at every level. Not that there aren't some great people out there. Maybe they're all great, but that's what the end result is.
Yeah, I mean, it's instead of changing parties and changing the government and put another political party in, we have to really fundamentally change how government works. And until we change that, like for instance, like Rick could have said here many times, that we have to go to some type of a proportional representation. We have to look at how we're making decisions. One of the things I did just in the last few days is decisions get made, and you wonder, how the heck did that decision get made? How does this all work? You saw this poor decision that was brought down against the teachers in June. The Labor Relations Board ruled that what the government wanted to do basically was to rip up the teachers' contract, and according to the Labor Relations Board, it was fine that they could do that. They ignored the Supreme Court rulings and all that. But if you actually looked at who made that ruling in the Labor Relations Board, he was a guy that worked for the Campbell and Clark government back in 2002 when they originally ripped up the teacher's contract, and they rewrote the legislation to say that they're going to do it. That was subsequently found to be illegal by the Supreme Court. 10 years later, Christy Clark goes to the Labor Relations Board and asks them to rule on it, and guess who's sitting in the Labor Relations Board? The same guy. They put him in this Labor Relations Board. So, this is how these decisions get made.
It's amazing. We never hear about this kind of stuff. Because,
I know.
Really, if it even happens once, it's an absolute fundamental disgrace. Or maybe it isn't. But we should know these things.
I could give you examples where there's a lot of concern about using Wi-Fi in schools, and a lot of concern. The parents were appealing to the Ministry of Education. So what happens? They put a ex-TELUS executive in to run the Ministry of Education, And TELUS is the wireless giant.
What level was this guy at?
He's a deputy minister, the guy that actually runs the ministry.
So the actual deputy minister,
Yeah.
that's probably the most powerful person in the ministry.
Yeah.
This is the Ministry of Education?
Yeah,
Being
he runs
run
it.
by a guy from...
From TELUS. What credentials did he have? Apparently the right ones, because the Liberals parachuted him in.
And it's funny, these things go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And we never hear about them. I mean, that's kind of an interesting factoid. You'd think the corporate media would somewhere along the line find, but of course they're all too busy watching the Luca Magnotta case, of which they love. I mean, how many times have I heard the word dismember over the last couple of weeks? They're insane.
Well, but what I find is surprising about this is I'm not a great researcher. A little bit of Googling, figure out who the people are that are making the decisions. The Citizens for Safe Technology, I brought this up before. They were going to go to the Human Rights Tribunal and appeal and ask them to allow an appeal on whether or not the getting exposed to smart meter radiation was a human rights violation. And the tribunal decided not to allow it to go ahead, that they were going to allow the hearing. And you wonder, well, how did they come up with that? Who's on the tribunal? Oh, well, we have a guy that was a huge corporate lawyer that worked for the industry for 25 years, that, who fought on the corporate side. He was parachuted into the tribunal. He was the guy that made the decision. So, on and on we go. They don't leave anything to chance, Jack. It isn't like it might go one way or the other. They put their man right in there. He makes the decision. Everybody thinks, well, it's a human rights tribunal. It's got to be, they must have some legitimacy. Well, they don't, because they're all appointed by the premier and the cabinet anyway. So they didn't have enough weight in there. They've had a lot of people that probably didn't know about the issue and may have actually allowed that hearing to occur. So they bring their own person in, and he makes the ruling that it's not going to happen.
That's why we need more democracy and why we need a free and honest media, because, I mean, the Blue Bridge is exactly the same story. We went from a $10 million repair, which was the first recommendation made by the engineers, to now we're up to a $100 million new bridge. And even worse than all of that absolute nonsense is the fact that the rail bridge got taken out. So we had the track all the way from Langford right to downtown. We got the track, it's sitting there unused, empty, because the people who run the country will not allow us to use rail. That's all. It's as corrupt there as it is with what you're talking about. And that's the fundamental issue. The media is all over the people want democracy in Hong Kong and China, right? Well, yeah, God bless them. But whenever people want democracy here, the same media, it won't even say the word. It pretends that we have it. It is so twisted.
Well, you have to wonder too. I mean, this is just a curiosity I have. Is it Hong Kong is, your full-on Western style monopoly capitalism, the rich get stinking rich and all the rest, like happens here. And that's in opposition to communist China, where basically it's sort of a state type of capitalism, state corporatism. But nevertheless, the West doesn't say, oh, it's capitalism and our model versus the Chinese communism. It's all about democracy, as if democracy and full-on capitalism are married together in some way. And we know that's not the case at all. So, I mean, you have to wonder what this real story is happening in Hong Kong.
Well, I'm sure people want democracy. I think people all over the world want democracy. I want democracy. I think Canada would love democracy. But the people who run the world and the people who run this country and the people who run this city, right down to the city, the people who run the school board, they're not going to let us have it unless we stand up and take it.
No doubt. Okay, do you want to touch on something else?
Absolutely.
You know, I had a list here, and I'll tell you this little story because years ago I was trying to get fairness into the health issues around electromagnetic radiation exposure and all that, and I'm known for doing that. And anyway, I was contacting the chief medical health officer and giving him studies showing that cell phone type radiation is causing harm. And I never really heard back. And finally, I got a little email back saying that he doesn't look at those. He sends them to the Center for Disease Control. So I said, okay, well, I'll contact them and ask them, well, what do you guys do with these studies? And they wouldn't say for a long time. But eventually, they had to say that they had this committee. And I said, well, who's on the committee? And they wouldn't tell me for months. Finally, through access to information and all that, I finally got a hold of the people on the committee. And sure enough, there was a guy from BC Hydro on the committee that looked at the study to see whether or not it was credible or whatever. And also there was a guy from the Canadian military on that committee. So they were letting the industry decide whether or not this research that I was presenting was credible. Now, of course, it's just completely wrong, and it was obviously a process they were using to snuff out the truth.
How many studies did you give them?
Eventually, several hundred.
Several hundred. They just
300 in one batch,
care.
And we did lots more. But the thing is that, and of course, it's corrupt. Then they disbanded the committee. They formed a new committee. I tried to find out who was on the committee, and they were just marginally better. But there's still no researchers, no doctors, no experts in that area. The thing is that it's terrible. You know, when they're talking about the Centers for Disease Control right now and worried about Ebola and all these other diseases, you can't trust these guys. And the other thing is, of course, is what's the story with our chief medical health officer that would allow this to happen, Jack? That's when you really start to wonder, what the heck is this? What's going on here?
And we're going to leave it at that. What the hell is going on here? Thanks for watching Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this show, in this segment, is Erlene Romago. And I'm having a little trouble with the name because everybody calls her Shakti. And we're going to be talking about secular ethics, or ethics, secular ethics. And you just a couple of minutes ago gave a beautiful description of what ethics are. So do you want to say
Go
it
for
again?
that again?
Yeah.
Ethics. Ethics are our internal moral code that gives us guidance when we want to make a decision of what to do. Is this a good thing to do or not? It's our ethical code that guides us.
And earlier I was saying how seldom the word ethics ever seems to come up in our society these days. It's like, you know, it's kind of ridiculous, really. So you wanted to talk a little bit about First Nations and ethics.
Well, before we go to that, can we just look at secular in terms of ethics?
Yes.
Because most people think that ethics comes from religion, that God has told us to act this way or to do this or to do that. We have 10 commandments, and each religion has their books and their guidelines. But secular ethics doesn't rely on religion. And that's the really most important point about secular ethics, that there's no religious basis. It's actually basic human values. It's compassion. It's caring for others. It's affection. It can be gratitude. It can be interdependence, knowing that we're all connected. These are human values. And that's what secular ethics is talking about. It's not talking about the different religious ethics, because that's hard to agree on. But secular ethics we all can experience. They are moral principles, and they're also like basic needs. We all have needs for affection. We all have needs for caring. I have that need, you do. And no matter where we are in the world, people have these needs basic human values and needs are secular ethics. We can agree on those.
Yeah, and can I say that I think you said yesterday also that the religions kind of personify in their own way these same values.
Yeah.
They just
Yeah, I think it's understood that all religions are doing the same thing. They want to help their people. They want their people to grow. They want them to be happy. They want them to suffer less. They just do it according to their cultural belief and background.
Yeah.
It's a vast world, and so the religions work with each of the differences of the countries. Similar values, and it is unfortunate that they have their wars and their religions are main causes of war.
sometimes.
Yes, but this is a way to avoid getting into that religious part because it's something we all agree on.
So
agree on.
yeah. You wanted to talk about First Nations and ethics.
Okay. I have examples that I thought might help to understand secular ethics, and First Nations would be one of them. First Nations, let me quote Richard Atleo. Richard Atleo, is it Howsett? I taught in a Howsett. They're New Chalneth that live off of Tofino. He's a very respected educator and hereditary chief. So here's the prayer that he has, which is, the Creator made all things. All things are related and interconnected. All things are sacred, and therefore all things are to be respected. So not only his nation, but I could venture to say most indigenous people would agree with this. I've lived with the Housets, and I've lived with the Niska, and I have a Mexican background. The indigenous people believe in kinship. We are all related to each other. And so we offer respect to each other. We take care to each other because we give it back also. It goes both ways. And I love this quote, and this is from a Halkamelam, great grandpa Leshem. When he was teaching his grandson, said, don't take more than you need. And if you do, give it away to others. And he said, talk to each thing. Way of respecting. Thank each thing. Now, these are values that he passed on to his grandchildren. And these are values that are shared among the people in the village, in the nation. They agree to these, and they all share them together. He says, if you treat everything right, then these things come back to you many times. So if you're doing good, it will come back. And if you're respectful of everything, they'll do the same. If you help everything, they'll help you back. So there we have very basic ethical code that they live with. They help each other and they work together. I think they live by these secular ethics.
Well, you know, when you said them, I thought I can agree with all of that. I think most people would agree with all of that, but we seem to be in a society that is totally, in so many ways, led in opposite directions from all of this.
So I'll go to the Dalai Lama. He's one of my other examples because he addresses this exactly. He says he would like to bring together spirituality, science. He has a conference every year, and now top scientists are coming. So it's spirituality, science, and wisdom traditions, which are the native traditions. He wants to bring those together, he says, to understand the urgent problems of society, which you're talking about all the time, and the moral crisis in the world. He says, I think society lacks a real conviction to moral principles, which are the ultimate source of inner strength. So a professor has said, we need to get a hold, a way to address these problems. What do we do? And he answers, we face the situations together, and with secular ethics, we can draw on these basic human values, the ones I was talking about that First Nations have and other people have. And at the heart of all of these will be the cultivation of genuine compassion and affection for other people. And he calls it quite often, so that everybody can understand it, warm-heartedness. And he says that if a person cultivates secular ethics, warm-heartedness, compassion, then when we are faced with moral questions, we will have a correct approach.
We're about halfway through. Maybe you can just run through what ethics, secular ethics are again, so I can remember.
Secular ethics. Secular ethics are basic human values. What do you value? Do you value kindness, consideration, love, truth, honesty? If I went to the Virtues Project, I could just go through a whole bunch of them. Generosity. Gratitude is a really important one, because lots is going on in this society, helping people to be more filled with gratitude. Every culture has gratitude, generosity, self-discipline, serenity, simplicity, sincerity, forgiveness. These are all values that we can agree on. In the Virtues Project, which came from Salt Spring Island, they studied cultures in the whole world and found that these virtues, they could be called virtues, are shared among people all over the world, from indigenous people, and they are contained in all the sacred texts. It's not about religions. This is about basic human values that we all share. That's what I call secular ethics. And they also, because they're secular and of the world, secular is of the world, then they can be used in the world by everybody. We can agree on them.
Yeah, I mean, on this show, my two issues are always democracy and media. But after we talked about secular ethics or ethics, I thought, really, you have to add that to it, because to have democracy and to have, it's got to be ethical. And it's completely unethical these days.
Yeah, it is. And so I think I think that's a great addition to you can have a trilogy. And I want to go to examples. I'm going to do Rotary because it's so easy. So Rotary International, you've got businessmen, etc., working together. They have 4 criteria that they use for anything. They say, is it the truth? Is it fair? Will it build better friendship and goodwill? And is it beneficial for all? So there's a set of secular ethics that they apply to what they do. Does that help you to get an idea of how these basic truth, fairness, goodwill, benefit will help? Let's not go into the Rotary, but those values.
Yes, the values, yes. I mean, truth, fairness, I've got to say them and I can't remember them. Truth, fairness,
benefit for all. So those are basic ones.
I mean, those thoughts should be running through our minds a fair bit of time. Truth, fairness, benefit for all. Truth, fairness, benefit for all. But in our society, it's something like we never, ever hear those words. It's crazy.
You see, I have spent quite a bit of time studying in Dharamsala, India, with the Dalai Lama, and I taught the nuns in their nunnery for 5 years. And I also study now with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I teach some nuns there. So I am around people who think like this all the time. They think like this all the time. If you're a nun or a monk, that is what you're doing. You're working on your inner self. And that's part of ethics. It's your inner life, your inner guide. So I'm with people who work on that all the time. When I come back here to be with my children and grandchildren, friends, I see a society that is so stressed that it's shocking to me, and moving fast all the time. And because of the issues you talk about, when do you have time to stop and breathe? So another person who is working on secular ethics in schools, besides His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is Thich Nhat Hanh. And he brings mindfulness to people and to schools for the same reason the Dalai Lama does, to relieve their suffering and increase their happiness, because this is bottom line what every human being wants, okay? And this mindfulness that he brings has people simply stop and take a breath and be fully here.
Ah, yeah. Well, I think we all wish, that there was more of that in our lives. We need that.
Yeah, we do. That's why I think adding it to making it your trilogy is really important.
And for all of us. It's just, it's funny because when we started to talk about it, it came to me that, it's something that just doesn't, it just, in our society, outside of maybe if you go to church or anything like that, maybe it's there, I don't know, but or talked about there, but, in regular society, just those words don't come up, and why not? They should, they're important.
North America or the West, I don't see them much at all. In traveling in Asia and living in some countries there, I do see more awareness of virtues and taking care of each other.
And of course,
because
people
they
do
move.
it here too.
Of course they do,
Yeah, the
absolutely.
people are great, as great as we can be, but in our society, the things that our society discusses and debates and talks about and that we're fed,
Well,
it's CSI Miami.
children all are great people to share these values with us, okay? And the Dalai Lama has a course at Emory University where those students are learning Secular Ethics 101. And Thich Nhat Hanh has just had a school in Brighton in the UK, asked them to bring mindfulness into the schools there. So that's going to help our society, it will. And the other thing I want to do is read this poem about kindergarten, because I think all children have this. I think all families who are making happy families share this. It's not something that is hard to understand. It's really basic. If you can stop and take a breath, it's easy to understand. So can I read this now?
Please
This
do.
is All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten by Robert Fulghum. These are the things I learned: to share everything, to play fair, and don't hit people. Put things back where you found them and clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt someone. Wash your hands before you eat and flush. Warm cookies and milk are good for you. Live a balanced life. Learn some things and think and draw and paint and sing and dance. Play and work every day a little bit. Take a nap every afternoon. And when you go out into the world, watch out for traffic. Hold hands and stick together, and be aware of wonder. So from the First Nation,
aware of
wonder,
wonder, yes.
wonder like that, eh? So First Nations, they have kinship. They know interdependence. The Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, they know working together. They know it well. And that's what this children do and we're talking about. hold hands and stick together. If we can do that in our families and in our communities, secular ethics can grow. And when we take a deep breath and be in the moment, we can have more wonder, we can have more internal peace, and then we have more energy to tackle those problems that you bring up on this show.
Thank you, Shakti. And thank you for watching Citizens Forum. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. I'd like to thank again the Shaw staff and the volunteer crew that makes it happen. Our guest in this segment is Mazen Al-Nahawi. And Mazen, you want to start off talking a little bit about Syria?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Jack, for having me again here. But as we talked before, it's the main issue when I talk about is the so-called ISIS. But I thought to start first by talking about Syria, the country itself. The Louvre Museum director once said that for every human being there is two homeland countries, Syria and where they're born. What he meant there that the whole human civilization start in what we are calling now the geographic area of Syria. Originally it's bigger than that. It's included Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Palestine and Lebanon, but all these division we see on the ground, it's just recent modern divisions. It was brought back by the colonial Western who, like for example, Iraq was cut off by the British. They made the border of that countries in the earliest of the 20th
Iraq
century.
used to be part of Syria.
It's used to be a big, we used to call it Bilad Sham, a Sham country. And it's the most important thing, that country or this land has a very, it has a harmony between the group of people who are living there. They speak the same language, they eat the same kind of food, they have similar culture and long history. But what we hear from the media always, like the West is West and the East is East. Like the area there, it's kind of completely cut off out of civilization, and it has nothing to do with civilization. And always they will be there as a religious group or a very fundamental or savages to create more legitimization for dominating that world. In the First World War, by the way, the bombarding people from air by bombs and killing them from air was kind of an issue discussed about Britain and Germany to discuss how to control that thing. Britain at that time, I think Lloyd, the Prime Minister of Britain, he said exactly that Britain deserved the right to bomb and policing the niggers. They used to bomb us before because we are niggers. Now they are bombing us because they want to bring democracy to us. So that bring us to ISIS. I really hear it's you cannot really express it if let's start from beginning.
I'll just say that you grew up in Syria, so you know the country.
Yeah, and I know the culture, and actually my major is as a critic in theater and drama. I so go and read behind the lines. But that's one of the issue when I really cannot understand the name of ISIS. If we have a decent media here, if we have a decent knowledge of history and some and culture, we know ISIS, it's a god, Egyptian god. To adopt that name and to use it in the media over and over and over, ISIS, 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 it's really tell you about how low the level of our knowledge of our understanding of history. It's so deteriorated.
So what you're saying, because you've mentioned this before to me, is that ISIS is a Egyptian god dating way back before the creation of the Muslim religion.
Or Judaism itself, or all monotheistic
So they would never take
religion.
that name as the name for a group that's fighting for a Muslim world, because it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's that, but Pandora box opened when the American used the Mujahideen to fight the so-called communism in Afghanistan. The three parties were involved in the whole process. The CIA, the Saudi, and the Pakistani security service trained the so-called Mujahideen to go and fight the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. In reality,
This was back in the.
in late 70s, early 80s.
This is when it all started, folks.
And from then if you remember, the Chechnya in Bosnia, and everywhere they use these tactics to fight their dirty wars against the enemy, as that time we called communism. Now, the same one who created this puppet monsters, he is going now to fight that monster. Let's see the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the USA and their policy there. They are the one who went to Iraq based on a lie, killed over 1.5 million Iraqi people, displaced 4 million people of Iraq, and all that based on a lie, like every other American war. There is just, would you please give me an American war was based on a true? Just one from their many, many. I mean, all of them go under the same cycle. People forget that the last war was built on a lie. They go after the new lie, and like, really, ISIS is so scary. But who funded ISIS in the beginning? Wasn't the Saudi and the Iraqi, the Qatari and the Turkish government to destabilize the secular Syrian government? To bring, to liberate Syria from...
And this is what I'm reading, but which isn't getting reported here in our corporate media, is that basically the American government, certainly not the American people, because they have nothing to do with the control of their government, but the people who run the United States, the people who run Obama, and the people who own the Congress, the CIA and the military, the US military, funded and built ISIS. I mean, there seems to be, I would say maybe there seems to be no question about it, but at least it's a debate. But it's never mentioned here. Instead, we're given the story that ISIS has to be attacked and destroyed, and now Canada, the United States I mean, Syria is a sovereign nation. We have now declared war, or the Americans have, on Syria. You can't bomb a country.
Mm-hmm. And they call it mission. This is what the CBC took. Like, for example, today they were talking in the parliament here about extending the Canadian mission in Iraq.
We are being tricked into and led into a war, as far as I can tell.
I believe Iraq has been occupied from day one, from when the time the British decide that it's a very important area for their oil and their oil company to dominate that region. Wherever you might later have some secular government like Saddam Hussein, but he also was an American asset. He tried to bring some better life to Iraq and somehow, but when his role is done, he put aside.
Because Iraq was a prosperous nation.
Yes.
Tell us about Syria. I mean, you grew up there. What was Syria like? Was it I mean, we're kind of pictured, we're told that it's, well, we're not even told anything. We don't know anything about Syria.
And the problem always, I try to take it back in history, because again, Syria was divided to 4 pieces in 1916 through.
But just your growing up there, was it I mean, I assume it was a place like anywhere else, just a country where
yes,
people lived.
Yes, we used to actually. I was there during the time of Hafiz al-Assad, who was the president at the time for a very long time, for 32 years.
The father of the current president.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And he originally the Ba'ath Party was in control, but little by little the power moved from the Ba'ath Party to certain individual. And if we look, when I mentioned history, after the independence of Syria, there was multiple coups.
But did people have good health care?
We have a socialist country. I used to go, for example, I study in a high institute of drama and literature. It's a very fancy place. We have more experts on this Like in the acting department, could have like 4 or 5 students with 10 experts on sound, on acting, on everything. And they used to pay £21, which is 25 cents as a tuition for their whole year. Education is free, hospital is free,
Dental care?
and everything there, it's belong to health, it's free. So we have a socialist country, but the problem was with the political freedom, that we have a dictator government. If you say outside what the government's saying, so you are labeled immediately as a traitor or against the whole country. So we did not have a freedom
Political
or
freedom,
democracy
okay,
to, but we cannot ignore that the whole region is set up to have many trouble, and our issue wasn't really with the Syrian government. We have the real issue is with the outside power who put these puppet governments in a corner and push them to act in a certain way. So when Bashar al-Assad, for example, what happened in the late, the uprising in the beginning was about real issue. People wanted, they don't want any more emergency law. They don't want anymore if they say something against the government, be disappeared and no one know where are they. But just remember something here. The American used to send like Maher Arar in Canada. This person, the Americans sent him to the Syrian security service to interrogate him.
So which
These
means
issues the American don't mind.
so if
They
they sent them there, we
yes.
can assume they're working together
They're
on
working
many levels.
together, but from the outside, no, Syria is harboring terrorism.
Yeah.
It's like pulling strings to decide when the time is done for this state to make
Yeah.
a regime change and bring democracy to
I'd
this
like
country.
to go back to what you said about if you said the wrong thing, you would be disappeared. I mean, so are you saying if you tried to form a group that talked about issues that the president of the country didn't like, you were literally in fear of your life?
Exactly. It's illegal to create a new group or
But people must have lived and gone along and they had your family, so...
the emergency law, it's the reason. We have the so-called war with the Israeli occupation state, so that was used all the time to keep the whole society under the military control. But in reality, they are okay with the existence of the Israeli occupation state because they never really fought except to protect their control over their territory. But when you talk about the wishes of the Arab people in that region, they don't want to be divided in this little state here and here. I don't know how Canadian can call like the US as a nation or Canada as a nation when you have multiple background, many languages, many style of food, many style of culture, many style of history. But the Arab are forbidden to be one nation. We keep hearing from our media about the 22 Arab nations, or even when they say the Arab world, like it's outside the world we are living in. Like they don't say for example, the European world.
Yeah, I know it's all like a myth. The people who control, the people who control the country, they just use whatever terminology they want, and that's what we hear as we grow up, and pictures are put into our minds and ideas are given to us, and for the most part we believe them because we don't realize how very diabolical it all is. It's incredible. To me, people everywhere want to live in harmony and peace and have a good life, but the people who run the world seem to want to pit us into wars against each other for their own benefit. It's completely insane, but there it is.
Going back to the Louvre director, we all related as a human being, and let's remember something that, for example, the whole Greek culture and civilization and the Roman later was established based on the connection of the Eastern culture. The name of Europe itself, it's a Canaanite name, or what the Greek called them Phoenician. The name of Africa used to be, the whole continent used to be called Libya, which is the mother of Europe, another Canaanite woman name. So it's the whole, this world was bonded, connected together, until we have now the control of information during the Catholic Church, when suddenly we discover that Galileo found out that the earth is go around the earth, which in reality Babylonia knew this fact from 2,000 years before that. But everything centralized on the Western, became like the Western civilization. It's the beginning of everything. The East has nothing to deal with that. The East are always barbarian, are savages, and we have to educate them and civilize them. This is the message of the colonialists from a long time, and it's still under the same thing. And what we call now is the post-colonialism.
Yeah, we've really got to get past these people who are trying to separate us and really realize that everybody is basically the same. People are people. Everybody wants peace. We should look very carefully at who the real enemy is, who our real enemy is. It's not the people of the Middle East. It's not the people anywhere else. It's the people who run this country and the people who they work for, who run the world. And we've got to throw them aside, because they will destroy everything. That seems to be where they're heading.
Or at least use what we call the brain and asking simple questions. Like when tell us ISIS, ISIS, ISIS. Isn't the first question is, what is ISIS is? What is the name? It's just to question the name. I will, maybe we don't have time a lot, but I will lighten it up by talking about Al-Qaeda, which is the first name they created, or because in Yemeni slang or Yemeni dialect, Al-Qaeda mean the bathroom. So understanding of the Arabic language for a group to be really Islamist group, and especially it's supposed to be many Saudi in that, who created this is that troop. And Saudi share a border with Yemen. They should know that in next door country they say Al-Qaeda for the toilet. So I don't know if it was an appropriate name for them. But more actually absurd that a group were really religious group would choose a name like Al-Qaeda, or because Al-Qaeda means the base in Arabic. But its association with the Islamist group supposed to be more into like putting God name into it or something.
Well,
I
guess
can't tell you about how the information they deliver to us, we don't question it, and suddenly we have a group called Al-Qaeda or the toilet.
So, I mean, the way I see it is the U.S. did 9/11, and not the people, but the people who run the U.S., they did 9/11, and everything that followed from that has led us to where we are now. It's not happening by accident. It's a nightmare for the whole world, and we're out of time. Thank you, Mazen Al-Nahawi.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching Citizens Forum.